In October of 2020, when most of the world was reeling from the COVID pandemic response, the Woodstock Church of Christ, in a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia, was reeling from a nuclear bomb that existed within their congregation. See, there was a young lady in that congregation, a wife, a mother, who had decided that she was going to leave her husband, she was going to leave her children, she was going to leave them behind, and she was going to enter into a lesbian relationship. I'm not making that up. Can you imagine if you had to deal with that? Elders, I'm not saying if you would know what was the right thing to do. Can you imagine if that's what you had to deal with? If someone came to you after services tonight and said, we have a situation. We need to talk about what's going on over here. That's what they were dealing with. That congregation began to reach out, or at least to attempt to reach out to this young lady, to pray for her, to try to restore her. At every turn, they found themselves being rebuffed. She was not interested in returning to her family, in returning to her children. She was not interested in returning to the Lord. She was not interested in talking to them. And finally, what they decided to do was what they were forced to do. They informed her via letter that if she did not repent by a certain date, that they would have no choice but to remove fellowship with her and to announce to the congregation that they were no longer in fellowship with her. They wrote her that letter, and if you would like to read that letter, you can. All you have to do is Google it. Because unfortunately, she took that letter and she posted it on her social media account. You can imagine what happened when that letter from those elders made its way onto Facebook and to Instagram. And people in the LGBTQ plus community began to comment on those things, began to comment on that church. That there are all sorts of vile things said about the elders at that church, the members at that church, the theology of that church. Speaking about a group of people who they would accuse and say that they knew nothing of what it means to love. They knew nothing of Jesus. They are a bunch of Pharisees. They are a bunch of cold, heartless people who are doing this terrible thing to this poor, innocent woman. And that's the edited version. It's all online. If you want to Google it, you can. From Facebook to websites, even all the way to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. You can read articles about this. Those elders began to receive death threats from those within that community. A number of death threats, and obviously their pictures, just like many of your elders, they were online. These are the leaders of the church. These are the shepherds of the church. So people began to write them and to call them and to threaten their lives. One of the elders of that congregation, this is a totally true situation I'm talking about, just a few years ago, just a few hours away from here. One of the elders of that congregation lost his job that he'd had for over 30 years because the people, those LGBT community folks that we talked about last night for just a moment, those individuals found out where he worked, began to go to their workplace and to harass the people that were working there. Lost a job of over 30 years. Ultimately, the police contacted that congregation and they let them know that on the Lord's Day that was to be coming, that there were people that had secured a permit for a protest. And they let them know that coming Lord's Day, they were expecting around 200 very angry, very hateful, very vile protesters to be there when they showed up for worship. The police department there in Woodstock informed them that they were ready for that and that they were prepared to have a police presence in their church parking lot around there. They were also prepared to have plainclothes officers intermingled amongst the congregation. One of the young mothers in that congregation, a friend of mine, has three small children, beautiful children. She wrote to me a little bit about some of the emotions that were centered around that and how the church was trying to deal with those things. And she said, I just don't even know what to think. I don't even know what to do. She said, should I take my children to church on Sunday? Should I take my children there to church on Sunday? You have to wonder about this. If the local police thought the only way they could keep you safe on this coming Lord's Day would be to put disguised police officers in your midst, is that a place you would want to bring your 2-year-old and your 3-year-old and your 4-year-old? This is what she was dealing with. This is what the church in Woodstock, Georgia was dealing with when they began, or at least to try to respond to a very obvious sinful situation in the very best way that they knew how. Now, as Christians, we are called to be different. As Christians, we are called to respond to the situations of life differently from those who do not know Christ. Every situation in life, all the way to even how we deal with death itself. Paul would say in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 7, he would say that the difference in the Christian and the non-Christian is, for we, that's us, Christians, we walk by faith. That's what we do. That's what we do when we have to deal with sin. That's what we do whenever we have to deal with tragedy. That's what we do even when we deal with death itself. We respond by faith and not by sight. We are a people, and this is an incredibly idealistic thought, but it is incredibly at the core of what it really means to be a Christian. We are a people who say what we would say as if we really believe that God Himself were standing right beside us. We do what we would do as if we really believed that the all-powerful Creator was working right alongside us. Even to the point of we believe and think what we would think as if we really believed that God was in our midst, because He is. For we walk by faith. Now we must be very careful. We must be very careful as we think about what it means to be a people of faith and what it means to walk by faith, that we don't get the idea that this walking by faith thing means that I'm going to do what God told me to do, and then God is going to make everything work out the way I want it to. Sometimes that's what people think it means to walk by faith. Now, brethren, I'm going to tell you, you don't know much about me, but I promise you, I believe in the power and the plan and the protection of God as much as any person in this room. I believe that our God is in control of this world, and I believe that our God is powerful. But if our concept is that I'm going to do what God tells me to do, and then He's going to make everything turn out the way that I want it to turn out, I'm going to have a problem. And that problem is probably going to happen sooner than I expect whenever things don't work out the way that I want them to. How many people have you known that have walked away from the church, and they walked away saying that they are angry at God? They're angry that God let this happen or didn't cause that to happen. And they're holding God to a promise that He never made. They're holding God to a standard that He never put forth. It's a creation of their own mind, because they think to walk by faith means I'll do what He says and then He'll take care of everything in this world. He never says anything like that. We as a people, we as congregations, we as families, we have to take a step forward in our faith that says, I'm going to follow God, I'm going to walk by faith, I'm going to do, I'm going to think, I'm going to feel what the way that He would have me do and think and feel, even if it doesn't turn out the way that I want it to. Even if walking in such a way means I'm going to have to risk everything in my life. One of my favorite examples of this comes in the book of Esther. And it's a familiar story that we see there in the book of Esther. Because Esther, you'll remember, has been elevated to the position of the queen. But as she's being elevated to the position of the queen through the conniving of Haman, and I won't unpack Esther. I'm assuming you're here on Monday night at the gospel meeting. You've heard of Esther, okay? But through the conniving of Haman, he's tricked the king into issuing this decree that on such and such a day that all of the Jews are going to be wiped out. Can you picture what that'd be like? Can you picture if there was legislation that came from the state of Alabama that said on such and such a day it was literally open season on members of the Church of Christ? Would you be nervous? Would you be nervous about what? Would you be distraught? Would you shed tears? Would you say, what are we going to do? How are we going to respond? Well, Mordecai was amongst those Jewish people who were trying to figure this out. But he had someone who had access to the king. He could go to Esther. Some of you know what it's like to be in hopeless, desperate situations. Some of you know what it's like to have a doctor tell you that you have a disease and there's nothing they can do about it. But you find out that there's a certain doctor who could help you. And you will move heaven and earth to get this doctor to help you. And you'll go halfway around the world and halfway around the country. And he goes to Esther and he begins to plead with her. You've got to go and talk to your husband. You've got to go and plead our case. But they didn't have the normal sort of husband-wife relationship that we might think about, because she said, no, this is against the law. You don't go, even I don't go into my husband. Even I don't go into my husband unless he's called me. And if I do, he can take my life. And you say, well, what he really doing? What kind of a husband would do such a thing? But you got to remember how Esther became queen in the first place. Right? You remember? Before Esther was his wife, he had another wife. And when she didn't do exactly what he wanted her to do, when she wanted to do it, he got rid of her. And ladies, and he replaced her with the most drop-dead gorgeous woman he could find. That was her life. So to think that he wouldn't do the same to her, that would be naive. You got to understand, you're asking me to put my life on the line. And it's in that moment that we have this classic verse from Esther 4 and verse 14, when he says, if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. And as for you and your father's house, you will perish. And who knows? Who knows whether or not you have attained royalty for such a time as this? Isn't that an amazing thought? This idea that perhaps God has put you in this time and in this place for a purpose. That God has put you in this state, in this community, in your school, in your workplace. That the very idea that God has brought you to this gospel meeting, even this very night, for a reason. Can we entertain that possibility? Can we entertain that God is working in this? That's what Mordecai is trying to get Esther to think. God's not standing back saying, I don't know what to do about the king either. No, God has a plan for their deliverance. And God has a plan for your deliverance. If you will listen, if you will walk with him. There was a sister who was telling me last night about her father that responded at a gospel meeting at a very old age and was born again. And one day she's going to see him in heaven because he was at that gospel meeting. And I'm praying that there's some of you that we're going to see each other in heaven because of what's going on here this week and what's going on here this night. And so Esther's thinking about all this, but it's still, well, I don't know if I can do this. I mean, this is a big ask, right? You're asking me to put my very life on the line. And finally, Esther agrees. She agrees that she's going to go before the king. But I'm not just telling you I'm going to go. She says in Esther 4 and verse 16, okay, you go and assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa, and you fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. And I and my maidens also will fast in the same way. Can you feel the pressure that's on this situation? I mean, I've never done this. I've never done this. But this is what she's not only committed to do, but she's saying, okay, Todd, I'll do this thing that you're asking. But before I do this, listen, brother, you're not going to eat or drink for 3 days. That means Tuesday you don't eat or drink, you pray all day. Wednesday you don't eat or drink, you pray all day. Thursday you don't eat or drink all day, you pray. Because that's the pressure that's on this. And only then I'm going to go in and I'm going to approach the king. I will go into the king, which is not according to the law. I know it's against the law. I know what I'm risking. I'm not naive in these things. And then she says, and if I perish, I perish. I know fully good and well that I could die for what I'm about to do. And I'm okay with that. You okay with that? Are we okay with that as a church? Are we okay with the idea that we might die for doing the right thing? That we might die for doing the will of God? I mean, we've grown up many times in this world where we expect to be praised for doing the will of God. And attaboy, right? I'm so proud. You were talking about my son preaching yesterday, and it's a beautiful thing. He's a young man. He's growing as a preacher, and I'm just telling you, he gets a lot of people, man, you're doing great, and this is awesome, and we're so proud of you, and you're one of ours, and all of these things, and that's a wonderful thing. I want him to receive all of those things, but I'm telling you, there's going to come a day that when he decides he's going to stand in the pulpit, nobody's going to tell him how great he is. They're going to tell him what a sorry dog he is. That's coming. That's coming. And his faith has got to grow to that point. To say, I'm going to do the will of God, and if I perish, I perish. Are we okay with the idea that our faith might cost us something? Do we have the sort of faith that's going to move us? We're going to move us. Literally, it's going to change us, change our lives. It's going to move us even in the face of risk. Are we okay with a faith that's going to cost us our comfort? We joke about air conditioning and padded pews, and listen, you let the AC go out and see how well we do as a people, right? I mean, we struggle with it, right? I mean, I don't know if I can do this or not. Listen, sometimes that speaks to where our faith is. Are we okay with the idea that our faith might cost us something? Are we okay? Are we okay with the idea that our faith might cost us our family? You know those people that you love so much? Listen, it's our faith that builds up our family, right? Right? I mean, it's faith that will give you a godly home and godly husbands and godly wives and godly children and godly parents. And in so many homes, I'm going to tell you what is missing is faith. But do you understand that same faith that will build up the family also can cost you your family? Jesus himself said, do not say, quit this. Do not say that I came to bring peace on earth. I came to bring a sword. Faith can cause division even in your own family. You need to understand that. If you love your mother or father more than me, you can't follow me. I'm thinking about a brother of mine, an incredible gospel preacher who raised his son in the Lord, to love the Lord and to know the Lord. And I know he wasn't a perfect parent, but I know he is a godly man. He is a godly man. And I thought about some things he was telling me that his son has run away from the Lord. His son has dove headlong into a world of sin and of reproach. And today, he cannot even speak to his son. And he cries about those things, and he grieves those things, and it makes holidays and the family get together so hard and so awkward. And do you know why he's separated from his son? Because of faith. Because of his faith? Because if he didn't have faith, all those things that are going on, and I won't unpack it. You can get your own illustrations for those things. But if it wasn't for his faith, you just wouldn't worry about it. He can do what he wants. She can do what he wants. Are we okay with the idea that our faith might actually cost us our possessions, our things, our stuff? 2 Samuel 24, he says, I will not make an offering to the Lord my God, which costs me nothing. It's about sacrifice. It's about giving those things up. Are we okay with that? Are we okay with the idea that our faith, it could cost us our life? We don't really believe we're going to die for our faith. I don't. To be quite honest, I don't. Okay? I really don't. What if it does? You remember it wasn't that many years ago that there were these pictures that were circulating. I think it was from the nation of Libya. And there were these men in orange jumpsuits that were lined up on the beach. Any of y'all remember some of this? Okay? And I don't know much about those men. I don't know much about their theology. Here's what I do know. They were living in this world in my lifetime, and people asked them, do you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God? And when they said that they did, they cut their heads off. doesn't even know about life. That's no. I understand. I'm telling you, you pray and you fast for 3 days. That's what I'm feeling. I'm gonna walk by faith knowing exactly what might be the result of that, and it may be a very, very bad result. And I'm okay with that. If I perish, I perish. You remember those 3 Hebrew boys? Remember Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego? And the King Nebuchadnezzar, he says, you're gonna bow down before this idol. I'm not bowing down before any idol. We worship the one, the true and the living God, right? And so you're gonna bow down before. Nope, not gonna do it. Not gonna do it. We don't bow down before idols. And he says, oh yeah? Easy to talk, isn't it? Easy to say. If you have kids, you know it's easy to say what you will and you won't do. And you're going to do what I tell you to do. And he takes this fiery furnace and he heats it up. He heats it up so hot. He heats it up so hot that even the people that are throwing them in, they burn up. You guys ever felt heat like that? I used to work, when I was in college, I worked at an aluminum mill, and we had this molten aluminum, these big vats, if you ever worked around hot metal. And I can remember when you got close to these vats of molten aluminum, it was painful. I'm not saying it wasn't like you was at the campfire, like, oh, this is warm. No, it was like, I got to get away before my skin part starts falling off, right? That's what he's going to throw them into. That's what he's saying. And they stand up in that moment. They stand up in that moment. And they say in Daniel 3 and verse 17, well, if it be so, then our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O God. When we talk about risk, when we talk about having risky faith, we are not talking about the power of God. The power of God is not in doubt. God has the power. God has acted in my life in amazing and powerful ways that have changed everything. I'm telling you, I know God can deliver us. But even if He does not, I'm very well aware that He may not rescue us. Then let it be known to you, O King, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. For we walk by faith. Do we have that sort of faith? Do we have faith that says, I'm going to do what God has called me to do, whatever the risk, whatever the unknown, whatever this might cost me? You want to know why so many times in so many places people don't respond to the invitation? It's not because people don't know that they're subject to the invitation. Many times people don't respond because they're fearful. They're fearful of, well, what's going to happen? What are people going to think of me? There was a sister that responded. This is several years ago. She was a friend of mine. I've known her for quite some time. And she came down the aisle and she had tears in her eyes. And she started telling me about some things that she had been involved in, some things she had done from so long ago. And I didn't have a clue about any of this. But I remember that she looked at me and this is what she said. She said, Wes, I should have done this a long time ago, but I just didn't want you to think any less of me. She was terrified that I was going to look at her and say, well, what a sorry person you are. Guys, do you think I think less of her? I think more of her. Because she has the courage to face her sin. To take that risk that says, I know that I need help. I know that I need Jesus Christ. I need His blood. There's a story that's told about one of the church fathers by the name of Origen, whenever he was a young man. And Origen lived in a time of great church persecution, of martyrdom for Christ. And his father, one day, upon confessing Jesus Christ, was burned to death. And Origen was a young man, a teenage man. And if you've ever had a teenage son, you know that they can be very idealistic and very stubborn, right? I've got one, right? I was one. I understand this. Well, Origen said, upon seeing his own father's life taken, Origen decides, well, if that's what happens to people that believe in Jesus Christ, then that's what's going to happen to me. And he told his mother, because tomorrow I'm going out there and I'm confessing Christ because I believe in Christ. And his mother, the story goes, begged and pleaded, please don't do this. I've already lost your father. I don't know that I could bear to lose a son. Mothers, you can understand what she's trying to say. And that young teenage boy, no way was she going to convince him. That's what I'm doing, because that's what I believe. And the story goes that on the day that he was going to go out into the center of town and boldly confess Christ before all the people, that when he went in to take a bath, that his mother came in and she removed every stitch of clothing from their house. And he didn't go out into the streets that day. I love that story because it illustrates what I think is a reality in our world today, of so many people who are ready to die for Christ, but not ready to be humiliated for Christ. That's faith. That's faith. And you can say, yeah, but you know, it worked out for these people, right? I mean, Esther is a beautiful story of God's deliverance, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I mean, that God delivered them, and we think about the hall of faith, and these people were called to do these great things and difficult things, Abraham and Moses and Noah. But when they did those things, God saw them through those things. Yeah, but keep reading. You keep reading in Hebrews chapter 11 about these men and women of God who walk by faith. And the Bible tells us in verse 36, and others experienced mockings and scourgings, yes, also chains and imprisonment for what? For walking by faith. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were tempted, they were put to death with the sword. They went about in sheepskins, in goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, ill-treated. Well, last night we talked about John the Baptizer, and about how he stood up and he said what was right and he said what was true. And what did he get for his trouble? What did he get for being God's spokesman? What did he get for being a herald crying into a world of darkness? He got his head cut off. That's what he got for it. Was he right? Should he have said what he said, or should he kept his big mouth shut? I think the Bible will tell us he was right. Someone needed to say those things, not just for their sake, but for the people around their sake, and I would say for the sake of people today that are dealing with the same things, to see that God takes these things seriously. I don't know what y'all did here at Burleson, but you remember when we were in the midst of our COVID-19 and the COVID response. And by the way, I've just come to the point, I really believe that every church I know of was doing the very best that they knew to do. I'm not trying to rehash all of that and who did or did not what, but I want to tell you something that I think I learned. No, I don't think I learned it. I know I learned it. Okay? I know I learned this from looking at the Lord's church during our response to COVID-19. We are a people who don't like risk. We are a people who will go to extreme measures to eliminate risk. Is that true? That is true. And it's also a problem. It's also a problem if that's how we respond to risk, even risk like that. If we're saying no, I'd stand there and let them cut my head off. I'm doubting that based on my response to much less risk, right? I just want to think about those things. What kind of faith do I have? Is it a faith that says, well, I'll do what God says, and then he better do everything I want him to do? Or is it a faith like Esther's that says, I'm going to walk by faith, and if I perish, I perish? We were going through a real difficult time. Out of work, I won't even get into all the details, but I hadn't had a preaching job in about 7 months. Couldn't find a church home, and I had 2 little kids. I had 2 surgeries during that time. I was stressed to the max, and I couldn't figure this out. And there were some people doing some things that they ought not have been doing, and we're driving in the car. Okay. Vince, you ever had that time you get in the car and it's you and your wife, and you're stuck there, and because you're going to talk. Whether you want to talk or not, you're about to have a conversation, right? You've had those moments. Todd's had a bunch of them. I'm looking on his face, right? It's like, we're going to talk. And so we had one of those talks about what was going on. And I remember we were up in Kentucky on I-65. I remember when we were having this conversation, and I just told my wife, I said, baby, I'm just frustrated. I'm just frustrated because I'm trying to do what's right, and nothing's working out. Nothing is happening the way that I think it ought to work. And I mean, if God would ask me my plans, I've made 15 plans, and He hasn't taken any of them, right? And it just was bothering me, and it was eating at me, and all of these things. And I told her, I said, I don't think this is unreasonable, okay? Because I just want to go somewhere. I want to find a church that I can preach at, and I'm telling you, I will love those people. I will die for those people. I will sacrifice for those people. I just want to love those people, and I want them to love me. And I mean, honestly, I don't think that's asking for too much. And my wife, who is a wonderful, godly Christian woman, if you got one of those, then just turn to her and thank her right now, okay? Do it, guys. I'm throwing you a softball, right? Okay? So, marriage counseling tomorrow night. Okay, but I was saying this, like, man, I don't think that's asking for too much. And my wife looks at me with all of the compassion and the kindness that she has in her heart, and she just says, well, you know, that's more than Jesus got. I remember I almost wrecked the car right there. It's like, yeah. I don't think she's trying to change my life on that car trip, but I'm going to tell you, she changed my life. She changed my life because I'm walking out there saying, I'm doing what God says. Why can't God help me out here? And I take a step forward in my faith that says, I'm going to follow God, and I'm going to follow God wherever that leads me. And if I perish, I perish. Y'all ever heard of this lady? Roberta Edwards. Anybody know who this is? A few of you? I don't know her. I've read about her. I know a lot of people that do know her. This lady's name, this picture came out of the Christian Woman several years ago. Roberta Edwards, this is your sister in Christ. Okay? Roberta Edwards was a sister in Christ from North Carolina who married a man from the nation of Haiti. And when she married this man from Haiti, she moved to Haiti. That's not a destination, okay? But she moved. You can imagine what it would be like if your daughter married a man from Haiti. Well, she moved to Haiti, and that's some sort of situation. I don't know all of it, but the man that she married ran off and left her there in Haiti. And of course, her family thought, okay, now she's going to come back home. She's going to come back home. And she told her family that she had decided to stay. She was going to stay in Haiti. And what she said was, she decided to stay and do whatever needed to be done. See, in the short time she had been there, she had started to care for all of these orphans that were running around the streets of Port-au-Prince. And she had established, or she was helping to care for them, and she stayed there to do what needed to be done. Why'd she do that? I didn't do it. I can tell you that right now. Why'd she do it? A woman. Faith. Faith. That's why she did that. I'm going to do what I would do if I truly believe that God were right here with me. Roberta Edwards went on to become the founder and the director of the Sunlight Children's Home in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. That's a dangerous place. You don't take your youth group to Port-au-Prince. Okay? You don't go there for vacations. It's a dirty, nasty place. She cared for between 20 to 30 children in that orphanage and oversaw a nutrition center that fed 120 children 2 meals every day. Isn't that awesome? That's faith. She didn't do that because it was fun. She didn't do that because it was easy. She did that because she believed that God had placed her in a certain time, in a certain place, for a certain reason. She did that for the same reason that Esther went in to speak to the king. She'd been there for several years, and she was feeling the burden of those things. And the account goes that one day she was out, and she had a little boy with her in the front seat and 2 teenage boys in the back seat. She was going to get gasoline. If you wanted to get gasoline, you had to take cans and get gasoline, and it was a whole process. And the car in front of her stopped, and the car behind her stopped, and men got out with armed weapons. She turned around to those this is totally true. She turned around to those 2 teenage boys that were sitting in the back seat, and she told them, run. You run or you're going to die. Run. And those two teenage boys got out of that car and they ran for their lives. And those gunmen came, and there's a little boy in the front seat. His name was Jojo. And they came and they took that boy. Presumably, that they were trying to get a ransom. They were trying to get money by stealing this small child. And when they took this little boy, those armed gunmen opened fire on Roberta Edwards as she sat in the driver's seat of that car. And Roberta Edwards died in the streets of Haiti doing the Lord's work. Is that a tragedy, guys? Is that a tragedy? I think a lot of people would call that a tragedy. I want to tell you that Roberta Edwards and her story, it's a horrible thing. It's a terrible thing. But it's not a tragedy. It's not a tragedy. It's an example of someone who gave their life for the cause of Christ, has given their life in order to be the hands and the feet of Jesus Christ in a very dirty and an ugly place. She's an example of someone who literally walked by faith. Can I tell you what the real tragedy is? The real tragedy is not Roberta Edwards dying in the streets of Haiti. The real tragedy are so many people all over this nation who live, our brethren at times, who live their entire lives only in pursuit of self, only in pursuit of their own glory rather than God's glory. They walk by sight rather than walking by faith. And they're going to get to the end of their life, and God's going to come, and what they're going to say, God, look at these fish that I caught. Look at my golf game. Look at this house that I have and this car that I purchased and what I've done to my body. And look at my financial portfolio. And that's all they're going to have to show for a life. That's a tragedy. That's a tragedy of someone who's living, trying to play it safe in everything that they do. It's been great. It's great to be here for this gospel meeting tonight and throughout this week. But I told you at the very beginning, we're not having a meeting simply to have a meeting. We're having a meeting because we want these things to change our lives, to change our families, to change our congregations, to leave this place and to say, I'm a changed man. I'm drawing lines in the sand and I'm not living the same way. I want you to leave this place and I want you to find someone. I want you to find someone who does not know Jesus Christ. I want you to find someone who does not know about the church that belongs to Jesus Christ. And I want you to share the gospel with them. I want you to invite them to study the Word of God with them. Share the message. You know more than most people in the entire world know. And you've got a list. But there's something, well, if I ask them about studying, they might get mad. They might say no, all these things, 50 different reasons. Well, I've never asked that person to study the Bible, and I've been talking to them for 40 years of my life. That's not faith. We're going to walk by faith. We're going to say, let me tell you about Jesus. I got one of my best friends, he talked about living right beside someone, like sharing a bunk with someone for 2 years. And I asked him, I said, did you ever get to share the gospel with him? And he said, well, no, a good opportunity never really came up. He's lying to himself. He never took the opportunity. The opportunity was there every single day. Don't be satisfied. Elders, don't be satisfied with more and more meetings and all you talk about are budgets and parking lots and buildings. Get in there and talk about people's souls, about how we're going to minister to people, about how we're going to shepherd people, about how we're going to help people to grow. Parents, raise your children in the Lord. Raise your children in the Lord. Your goal is not just to get them to be 18 years old. Your goal is that they would know the Lord. Raise them by faith. And listen, if they miss a ball game, if they don't get straight A's, that is not the end of the world. I need to say that over and over again because I'm seeing so many Christian families that are losing their children, and the parents are doing it to the children because they're walking by the almighty ball than they are walking by faith. And they're just blind to it. Don't do that to your children. Teach them to know and to love the Lord, that when all of that goes away, listen, this will not go away. This will not go away even with death itself. We must speak out. We must be that light. We cannot hide like we talked about last night. And we say, well, what if the people aren't going to like that? What if they protest? Or what if people get mad? Hey, what if they take away our tax-exempt status? You heard people saying that? I've been in meetings where that was the point of concern. Well, if we do this, they might take away our tax-exempt status. Who cares? Who cares if they take away our tax-exempt status if we're standing up for the things of God? Do we walk by faith or do we not walk by faith? That's the choices we have to make. May we be people who look for opportunities to share the gospel and to give grace and to give mercy in every way that we possibly could find. Listen, so what if they take advantage of it? You ever try to do benevolence? What if they take advantage of it and they're not sincere and they do this and they do that and benevolence is crippled in the church because we're so worried that we're going to make a mistake or somebody's going to take advantage? Who cares? Who cares? They took advantage of Jesus and He still died for them. That's our example. That's what it means to walk by faith. Listen, if you're here tonight and you're outside of Christ, if you're here tonight and you have never been baptized into Christ, and you say, I just don't know about that, and I have questions, and it's a big commitment. Listen, walk by faith. Risk it. Put it on the line. Say, I don't know all the answers, but I know who has them. I'm going to give my life to Him. If there's sin that needs to be repented of in your life, and you're scared to death that somebody's going to find out that you're not perfect, guess what? They already know. They already know. Confess those sins and allow them to walk with you, and you walk with them as we go to Jesus for His blood. That's what the church is. And if you're in your life and you're overwhelmed by the burdens of life, guess what? The burdens of life are bigger than you. They will, I'm telling you, they will. You may be the biggest, baddest dude in here, physically or spiritually, but they will overwhelm you. You cannot bear them on your own. But Jesus says, you bring me your burdens, and I will give you a peace that passes all understanding. That's the invitation. That's the invitation. That's the way that Jesus walked, and that's the way He calls us to walk. Not as people who are saying, well, this is like a one for one. I'll do what you want me to do, and then you better give me something. No. We're talking about the great, glorious, worthy Creator, Sustainer, God of all the universe, and He's calling us to walk with Him, to walk by faith. Friends, if you are subject to the invitation, whatever that may cause you to risk, you risk it. Understand the risk, but then you risk it. And you look the world right in the eye, and you say this very night, and if I perish, I perish. But I'm going to walk with the Lord. Friends, if you have a need, you come tonight as we stand and as we sing.
When we walk with the Lord in the light.